to be able to serve as one of the pastors here and to have retired pastors who are part of this congregation. And sometimes that can be pretty intimidating, especially when one of them used to pastor this church and another one is the pastor for your wife while she was growing up, and another two are guys that you admired while you were learning and cutting your teeth in ministry. All those different things that came together, it was like, it could be a bit intimidating. Thanks, these aren't today's notes. I'm not sure I have them, but But it's a joy to be able to recognize and acknowledge the work of men like Dave and John and Terry and Phil and Luz, and there's somebody else I'm forgetting, all right? Joe and others. I mean, let me just tell you, it's a special thing that we have here. And I would challenge you to take advantage of the opportunity to learn from not only the men, but their wives, because their wives know more of the real side of it than husbands do. God has blessed men with ignorance. I didn't hear enough amens on that out of both sides. I really expected that was going to be a big one from men and their wives. But there's a lot to it. And Don, thanks for coming today. Thanks for reaching out and letting us know that you wanted to just publicly say thank you to Dave and Georgetta. And they mean a lot to us here, and they're teaching us still every day what it means to love others. So, it's the close of February, and a year ago is when I set the carpet on fire. If you were here, you may remember that, and you're kind of like, well, he set the carpet on fire? I was holding a piece of paper, and I lit that piece of paper, and it got a little too hot, and I thought I'd just drop it down in a bucket, and it missed the bucket. And it landed on the carpet of my platform, and there was a quick stomping that had to ensue in order so that way we wouldn't have to replace all the carpet. For those of you who are regulars here, you know that in the past 8 weeks, that we've replaced all the carpet in the building. And it wasn't because of my fire a year ago, okay? But if you recall, if you were here a year ago, I was talking about a 3-letter word that when I was growing up, it was a word that I was extremely uncomfortable talking about, and my parents loved to harass me as they talked about it because they would, kind of talk about it in code, and I never fully understood what it was until I was, old enough to understand a few things about life. And they would talk about a 3-letter word, except for they would spell it backwards, X-E-S, and I was ignorant and, kind of growing into manhood and didn't have any idea what they were talking about. But they were talking about sex, and they were talking about, making jokes about it or whatever, and this was just kind of their way of being able to talk about it with, their 13-year-old not really catching on to what was being discussed. And through the years, I found myself kind of thinking that sex was something we weren't supposed to talk about, at least not publicly. Sex was something that we were supposed to kind of keep quiet about and not really, talk about. But we could watch it on movies. We could, read about it in magazines. And there were a number of different things that we were allowed to do with regards to the subject of sex. But it was taboo to talk about in the family. And since I didn't go to church when I was growing up, I didn't know if you could talk about it in church. But when I did start going to church, nobody talked about it. Except for, quietly on the side. And it was talked about in youth group for basically, the simplicity of it was don't have sex. Nobody explained to us why. Nobody explained to us, what happens if we do. Well, actually, somebody did explain to us if we did have sex, what could happen. We'd get a disease or we'd get pregnant. And I never figured out how I could get pregnant. Are you with me? All right. So there was a lot of, confusion, and all we were challenged to do was to stay pure. The purity rings and the purity commitments and the purity wall where you'd sign your name. And here's the thing. I'm just kind of curious, what qualifies someone as pure? Because when Jesus talks about adultery, which is sex, he says that if you have a lustful thought, you've committed adultery. And so, are you pure if you had a lustful thought? Well, what should I do with, that? How do I wrestle through that dynamic? Well, I didn't do anything. Are you pure if you just engage in makeouts? See, there's some young people who understand that, and they've wrestled through that, and it's like, hey, how far is too far before I cross the purity line? Because, here's the thing, like pure means like spotless, without fault, blameless, unblemished. And so, am I pure if I ran around in the grass and didn't get any grass stains on me? Am I still pure? Right? Maybe I picked up a little bit of grass, but it didn't stain me. Am I still pure? And I think that this idea of purity becomes very difficult and very challenging for us to hold on to because we're not really sure how pure is pure. And we're not sure where the line is. And I talked to my wife, and she's shared this publicly with people and privately. Her big question is, where is the line? What is the line? That was her question when she was growing up. How far is too far? And so we create all sorts of layers. James Dobson put together in his book, Life on the Edge, the levels of intimacy. And he challenged, the young person who was reading the book between the ages of 16 and 26, there are different layers, and each layer is more intimate than the other, and it kind of starts with, holding hands, and then it's face-to-face, and then stroking the hair, and then on and on and on it goes. And I thought, well, okay, which one is the cutoff? Like as a 20-something, how far can I go? Am I allowed to hold a hand? That seemed to be acceptable. Am I allowed to face-to-face? That's called kissing. Is that yeah, okay, that was acceptable. And then I read another book that was, just kiss dating goodbye, and the guy said, don't kiss your girlfriend or your boyfriend until your marriage day. That's so romantic. And I thought, man, that's some self-control. Is that realistic? And later the author came back and he recanted that. Yeah, because at the time he was single, and then he went through his married phase, and he realized that maybe that wasn't the best model to hold up. It was kind of more of an extreme than, But here's the thing, is like it's very confusing. And how do we talk about sex? And why should the church talk about sex? That's an even better question. I mean, after all, shouldn't the church just be talking about, the teachings of Jesus and how to get to heaven? What place does sex have in this dynamic? Well, interestingly enough, though we became prudish and maybe even hesitant to talk about sex, though we became, kind of a society that kept sex in private spaces in the conversation zone, and it wasn't allowed in the public conversation zone, and it began to, for at least the church, began to be a place where we were quiet. The Bible talks a lot about sex, particularly who not to have sex with. And yet, at the same time, the authors of the New Testament lived in a sexually charged world, particularly those who traveled outside of Jerusalem. So as they traveled, and you read through the book of Acts, you have to understand that every city that is mentioned in the book of Acts, particularly as they get further and further away from Jerusalem, is a city that basically has billboards advertising the sexual promiscuity that would be going on. It basically says, hey, come and have sex, because the largest institutions in those cities would have been temples to pagan gods, and then a common occurrence with those temples would be temple prostitution. And it was an accepted norm. This is part of how people engaged in religious activity. And even back in the Old Testament period, when we see the pagan tribes around, there is a lot that they're doing that if we dig into it and we look at it, we find that, wait a second, they were a little bit freer in their sexuality than what God was wanting the Israelites to be. So Paul writes to the church that is forming early about what it means to follow after Jesus. And in his writings, there are different times when he writes, and he writes some pretty poignant things to the church about sexuality. So if you have your Bibles, open up to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And I'm going to tell you that this is one of these sections of Scripture that helps us understand that it's the responsibility of the church to talk about sex. That the church has an obligation to step in here. And I think it's even more critical today that the church step in and talk about it, because many of us are broken because of our sexual past. Many of us have been wounded because of sexuality. So 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 3. It's a very simple verse. God's will is for you to be holy, so stay away from all sexual sin. All right, just let that sink in for a moment. God's will is for you to be holy, so stay away from sexual sin. Sexual immorality is how some translations will capture that phrase. All of them capture God's will. Stay away from, abstain, avoid sexual behavior outside of an accepted norm. What's that accepted norm? That's the question. What makes something immoral? What makes something sin? And how is it that sexuality fights with God's will? How is it that our sexual behavior, particularly our sexual sin, Paul puts it together in contrast to God's will? Boy, that is tough. I mean, there's a lot in this verse. And it's a very simple verse. It seems to make real simple sense. But again, what is sexual immorality? What is sexual sin? And we've come to define sexual immorality as sex outside of marriage. What kind of marriage? See, our culture is redefining things and constantly changing how it understands things. And so we have to be clear about what is and is not sin, and what is and is not immoral, and what we mean by when we use certain phrases that, what is God's will? Well, Paul in other places in Romans chapter 12 says that God's will is good, perfect, and pleasing. Perfect doesn't mean that it's in the sense of pure, it means it's complete. Sexual sin, what is the sexual sin that Paul is referencing? I think it's real simple, that Paul is saying a sex outside of a male-female marriage is sexual sin. 1 Corinthians, we like to look at the letter to the Corinthians because it talks about all the problems of the church. And we see all the challenges that are in there. And in chapter 6 and 7, Paul begins this discussion about sex and this discussion about the fire that burns inside you and those sort of things. And it's good stuff to read. But in there, he states very clearly in 1 Corinthians 6, so flip over there. And I want you to take a look at this. And this is a theological forming and why it's important that we hold on to this. And why we wrestle with this in contrast to God's will, okay? 1 Corinthians chapter 6, starting at verse 12, I'm going to read a larger section. It says, "You say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. And even though I'm allowed to do everything, I must not become a slave to anything. You say food was made for the stomach and stomach for the food. This is true, though someday God will do away with both of them. But you can't say that our bodies were made for sexual immorality. They were made for the Lord, and the Lord cares about our bodies. And God will raise us from the dead by his power, just as he raised the Lord from the dead. Don't you realize that your bodies are actually parts of Christ? Should a man take his body, which is part of Christ, and join it to a prostitute? Never. And don't you realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her? So the scriptures say the two are joined into one, but the person who is joined to the Lord is one in spirit with him. Run from sexual sin," verse 18. "No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. Don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price, so you must honor God with your body." There's a lot that's in this sense of trying to understand where is Paul coming from, what's he pushing at. But here's the thing, Paul classifies sexual sin as different than other sins. And this is why the church gets hung up on it. The reason that the church struggles to be able to engage with a culture about sex and about sexual sin, and why the culture gets upset with it, and why we kind of wrestle through what does it really mean, what is it really talking about, is because for some reason that isn't fully fleshed out, isn't fully given a great definition, sexual sin is different than lying. Sexual sin is different than murder. Sexual sin is different than the other sins that are out there, even disobeying your parents, even aspects of worshiping idols. Sexual sin is different. And so Paul has this very strong mindset that sexual sin is different and is in contrast to God's will, and it has something to do with the way that we live out ourselves. Because if, again, you go back to Romans chapter 12, where Paul says, hey, submit your bodies to Christ as a living sacrifice, so then you will know what God's will is for you, his good, perfect, pleasing will. In other writings, he seems to indicate that, hey, God's will and sexuality are in contrast, and so our bodies are part of the sexuality, and this is where I think it matters for us, and I think this is where we get it confused, is we either like to think that when it comes to sexuality, that people will not act out, or they can't help themselves from acting out. Now, I recognize that in many Christian circles, the name I'm about to share with you is somebody who's on the bad guy list. But before he got on the bad guy list, Rob Bell wrote a book called Sex, God. And in there, he presents this interesting premise that just resonated so strong in my mind. And quite simply, he says, we are neither animal nor angel when it comes to sexuality. We are neither animal nor angel. And what he means by that is the sense that angel is that, oh, well, I'm never going to struggle with it, or my kids are never going to struggle with it, or it's never going to be an issue because we're going to be pure away from it, and we'll be able to protect ourselves from it, and there will never be an issue. That's the angel side of it. The animal side of it is that, you know what? You got an itch, you got to scratch it. You got a longing, you got to dig into it. It's something that, after all, how many of you have had that dog get a little closer than you wanted it to while you were visiting a friend or you owned it, right? Get off my leg, that dog. You know what dog I'm talking about, right? And some of you are like, golly, we're doing this in church? Here's the thing. Animals can't control their sexual impulse. All right? Animals don't control it. It controls them. Angels, let's just say they don't have it. And we're neither. We are not those who are of the animal class that we can't control our sexuality, because let me just explain and put it out there very clearly, that because of Jesus, we can. Now, without Jesus, we may not be able to. Without Jesus, we may find ourselves succumbing to the sexual urge. We may find ourselves finding that we're wrestling with this innermost hunger and desire, and so we just give into it, and we seem to say, well, I couldn't control myself. And let me just say, outside of Jesus, yeah, I agree with that. But with Jesus provides us a way out. You see, we like to think that the ability to express our sexuality whenever, wherever, and those sort of things is truly freedom. That's not freedom, that's bondage. Freedom is in the ability to say no. After all, think about this. Some of you at work, you don't feel free because when your boss comes to you and says, hey, I need you to do this, you don't say no, you say yes because you are bound to say yes, because that person's the boss. But freedom is found in the ability to say no. And this is one of those things that fundamentally I think we miss about Jesus, is that Jesus gives us the ability to say no. And Jesus gives us the ability to break free from it. But it's not that simple, and I recognize that it takes a lot of work. And here's the challenge, here's the frustration, is that because we live with this concept that freedom is to be able to express ourselves sexually and to fill the urge that we've got and to scratch the itch, that what happens is that those who believe that that's freedom exploit those who are powerless. And that exploitation is found in many different levels. And they use many different tools to further exploit it. This week I was listening to NPR, and I believe it was the noon hour program where the Think on KERA, where they were discussing an interview with a lady who wrote a book about sexual harassment in the restaurant industry. And in there, she's discussing how that long shifts, close proximity, and alcohol lead to places of exploitation. And it's almost accepted that this is the way it has to be in the restaurant industry, because after all, if she wants to get good tips, she should put up with being exploited. If she wants to make money to be able to pay her bills because she's earning somewhere around the vicinity of $2.13 an hour outside of tips. You see, this is something the church should really be speaking up against. And we should be speaking up against the rise and the proliferation of restaurants that are about exploiting young women in their form. And honestly, I'm just going to tell you my personal view on this is I don't think Christians have any business at Hooters. I don't think Christians have any business at Bone Daddies. I don't think they have any business at Tilted Kilt or Twin Peaks. I don't care how good the food is, because they're built around the exploitation of women's breasts and butts. And the girls who go work there are desperate for money. And so because they happen to be shapely, because that's the way that God made them, and they feel powerless to be able to make money and survive on their own, they put themselves out there vulnerably to be exploited. And you know what? It's okay. We joke about it. No, it's not okay. We really need to think through that. And we should be proponents of raising minimum wage for waitstaff so that way it's equal to the minimum wage of everybody else. It shouldn't be like, $5 less than, and in some cities, $12 less than. So that young lady is put in a position where she serves alcohol to a jerk who then slaps her on the rear end. And she's been degraded and degraded and degraded all night long. And then the manager or the chef or somebody else on the team comes up to her and shows her kindness. And the next thing you know, she's had sex because she was treated cruelly all night long. And somebody showed her kindness. No, somebody exploited her. Sexuality is a place where people are being exploited left and right. We know about pornography. Everybody knows about pornography after all. It's kind of a joke nowadays. But did you know that pornography is a place of exploitation? Oh, we think, no. Most people engage in porn, they're getting paid, and they're actors and actresses and that sort of thing. No, let me just tell you that the New York Times New York Times did an expose on this, right? And they point out that what women get paid for engaging in the sex acts is degradingly low. $100 for a blowjob? Well, they're making money. No, they're being exploited because they're desperate. And many of them are being drugged up, treated with alcohol, finding a way to cope so that way they can make enough money to survive. They're not free. They're enslaved. But did you know when you add to that it's only a segment of the porn industry that's making real money? A very small segment, and the vast majority of porn that's being produced, particularly outside of the United States, involves women and men who are being trafficked. They're slaves, basically. They have no choice in the matter. And some of us, particularly some of us men, have unwittingly engaged in the exploitation. Because we thought, well, when we look at porn and we scratch an itch, that we're not hurting anybody. But actually we are. Actually we are. And what the crazy thing about pornography is fiction, and it leads us to this place of unrealistic expectations and unrealistic demands on ourselves and demands on the people we're having sex with, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and it's all about exploitation. So why is it that God would say through his messenger Paul that, hey, it's God's will that you be holy, you be separate, you be different than, and that you avoid sexual sin? Is because sexual sin is a place of exploitation. It's a place of oppression. It's a place where the strong rule over the weak. And if you read through the Bible, it just comes out screaming at us that God is for the weak. That God is about liberating those in bondage. That God is about lifting up those who have been oppressed. And that God expects his people to engage in that fight. It's from beginning to end that we see that. You see, we're neither angel nor animal. Human beings have been on multiple different levels set apart from the other types of animals out there. I mean, after all, again, crazy things you learn on NPR in a week. One of the evolutionary high marks of humanity is the ability to sweat. And I was like, what? But you know why elephants have big ears? Because they don't sweat. You know why a dog hangs his tongue out? Because he doesn't sweat. You know why a pig rolls in the mud? Because he doesn't sweat. You know why mankind was able to outrun whatever was chasing him? Because they sweat. And so here in the formation of, our bodies, and whether you side on the side of, hey, God created us exactly as we are today and we've just kind of lived with it, or God created and it evolved and God's directed it. I'm not going to get into that debate today. I'm kind of lean more to the sides that God made us this way, right? There is something that separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. And it's not just our ability to sweat. It's our ability to communicate. Our ability to reflect on what we've experienced, to learn from and grow into it. And it's our ability to control our urges. You see, we are different than. And when we treat ourselves at the base level like the same as, then we're not living into what it means to be human, which is what God's will is. God's will is for us to be completely and entirely human as he made us to be. And we find ourselves locked up in sin and locked up in brokenness and unable to find our way out. And so, because of the exploitation that people go through and that they experience because they're desperate to find a way, or because somebody, took advantage of them by power or took advantage of them by alcohol, we are stuck. Because the church won't talk about it because we keep it a secret. And if you remember a few months ago, I said, secrets enable. Secrets enable bad behavior to continue. Secrets enable bad thoughts to continue to overwhelm us. Secrets eat us up. In addition to the secret, there's the shame. The shame that we feel because we have been exploited, molested, taken advantage of. Mostly unwillingly, but maybe even a little bit willingly. There's the shame that can't seem to control my impulse. And so I see that picture at the bottom of the news feed that is a legitimate news article, and yet they're selling a picture of a half-dressed woman in their advertisement, and I just find myself clicking on it. There's the shame of, man, I don't look like that person. Am I okay? I mean, after all, when I look at me in the mirror, I don't see the abs and I don't see the fully developed parts. So am I okay? There's the shame of, I saw it and I liked it. And I know I'm not supposed to. And that shame paralyzes us. It locks us down from being able to find help because we're like, if I tell somebody, they're going to think I'm sick. I mean, I'm a dirty person if I tell them. The shame of if I speak it out, then maybe if I speak out the abuse that I went through, then I kind of have to live through it again, right? If I really tell what happened to me. So I don't want to. I won't engage in it. Let me just say, secrets enable, shame paralyzes, but Jesus liberates. And when we speak, and I don't understand this because this is, again, a difference between us and the rest of the animal kingdom out there, is that when we speak, there's power in our voice. There's power in the words. There's power in getting it out. I don't understand it. It's part of this mystery of how God designed us, I think, that there's something about speaking forth something that actually causes things to begin to change. Whether you speak forth a goal, right? I want to lose 15 pounds, and you say it enough that you actually begin to live into it, and there's power in that. There's power in speaking forth and saying, you know what? I was hurt and I was abused. There's power in speaking up and saying, I can't seem to stop. I don't understand how that works, but there's something about the way that Jesus has made us that makes that a reality, and it becomes even more powerful when we speak to Jesus. And we say, Jesus, I'm hurt, I'm wounded, I'm broken, I can't seem to find a way out. Jesus, I feel unbalanced, I feel out of control, I feel as though I can't. And we begin to speak it first to Jesus. But don't leave it there. Because this is a breakdown in our theology. A breakdown in our theology is the belief that if we just speak it to Jesus in heaven, that it's good enough. But we forget to speak it to the rest of Jesus who is on earth. Because what is the church? The church is the body of Jesus. And that's why confession with one another is so powerful. Because there's something about if I just speak it to Jesus in heaven, I'm not fully confident that he's taking care of it. But if I speak it to Jesus on earth, then I begin to experience that he's taking care of me. You see, we have to speak out our secrets. And maybe your secret is that you're addicted to a form of sexual immorality. And some of you are like, well, I don't have an issue with porn. Okay. Maybe your issue is something else in the way that you exploit your spouse. Some of you are like, well, but I'm afraid if I speak it, you're going to think I'm horrible and I'm going to lose everything. You may lose some things, but it'll probably be for your betterment. Because it'll enable you to free up and begin to address circumstances that you're in. You may be thinking, well, look, you don't understand. I got to keep it a secret that I was molested as a child, because if I tell somebody that I was molested, then they're going to look at me and they're going to have like pity on me, and I don't want pity. That's that shame voice speaking. Because it's not pity It's help. I don't want people to look at me like, oh, that poor broken person. You know what? Maybe we'll look at you and say, wow, how courageous and strong that they can stand up and speak truth. They can share what happened to them. And maybe, just maybe, because they spoke up about it, we're able to stop the abuser from doing it again. I recognize many of the abusers are long gone. But if we speak up and we speak about it, then it prevents another abuser from doing it. Some of you are in this room and you're kind of going, hey, you know what? I'm not in this position of feeling powerless and out of control with my sexuality. I'm not in this position of feeling exploited and abused. Great, wonderful. Will you do us a favor? Will you step up and help those who need help and healing? Join the fight. Be a part of it. Share with us how you found freedom in sexuality through Jesus. Today, I'm going to ask the worship team to come, and we're going to take a moment here, and we're going to give you a chance to respond. Give you a chance to respond to God, to respond to the healing and the forgiveness that Jesus offers to us. And here's what I want you to think about as they're getting in their spots, as they're taking their place. What secrets are you keeping regarding your sexuality? Some of you are like, no, you don't understand. I got same-sex attraction. I can't tell. Yes, you can. You don't understand. The person that I was abused by is a person in power. You can still tell. You don't understand because, like, every time I open up my device, I'm looking at porn. Can't tell you that. Yes, you can. You can tell God that. And you can begin to find healing there. Because until you confess it, He can't treat it. He's probably been wrestling with you already about this. And you've been feeling uncomfortable about this for a while. And that's a sign of the Holy Spirit at work in your life, convicting you, challenging you, drawing you, wanting you to change. And you're kind of like, no, I don't know, I don't want to. And He's saying, no, really, come on, it's okay. If you'll trust me. If you'll trust me, we'll find the hope and the healing. Here's what I know. When we keep it a secret, we continue to allow it to happen. When we're ashamed and locked in that shame, then it'll paralyze every other aspect of our lives eventually. Because we won't be able to look at people honestly in the eye. We won't be able to know that they care for us because we're afraid that if we share this one thing, that they'll look at us in the wrong way. Shame is overwhelming. But Jesus liberates. Jesus doesn't throw out shame. Jesus doesn't throw down condemnation. He died and rose again and ascended into heaven so that way our condemnation is removed. He took on all of our sin. He took on all the exploitation that we would experience so that we could be freed. But it takes the work of not just Jesus in heaven, but Jesus on earth. That's why He has the church. And within the church, you should be able to speak your brokenness. Within the church, you should be able to find the help that you need. Within the church, there are people who are gifted in healing. And some of that's supernatural healing. Some of it is the doctor healing. Some of it is the counselor healing. Some of it is the small group that brings you healing. Some of it is a retreat that opens up your eyes and gives you tools to be able to walk through this. Here's the thing, is that it doesn't just automatically resolve everything, and I know that, and I don't want you to think that it does, but I will tell you that if you don't take the first step, you won't get to the last step. If you're not willing to take the first step, then God can't lead you to the final step, a full liberation. You see, it's a process that He's working out. It's a cleansing that He's bringing forth, and if we'll trust Him, He is faithful to finish what He started. And so today, I want to invite you after you take a moment and you just reflect upon what the song is that the team is going to sing. And I want you to come forward, and I'm going to ask our elders and church leaders, pastors, retired pastors, to be available to pray. And as you come forward, here's the thing. If you want someone to pray for you, you have to tell them. And you have to tell them what you need them to pray for you about. And those who are going to be praying with you, your job is not to gossip. Your job is not to tear them down or beat them up. Your job is to stand alongside them and help them find freedom through Jesus. I'll trust the Holy Spirit to lead you in how to pray specifically for the need that comes to you. So while they sing this song about freedom, I want you to think about, how are you locked up? How are you trapped? And if you want someone to pray for you specifically, then I'm going to ask that you come over here to this side, over here to my right, your left. Do you want someone to pray for you specifically? If you're willing to pray for someone, I want you to come before those start coming to pray. I know it's incredibly intimidating. Maybe you want to just pray on your own. That's what this side over here is for. My left, your right. Just come over here if you just need to quietly, on your own, pray. We have a jar of oil. And if you're unfamiliar with what it means to anoint someone with oil, let me just tell you, it's not magic. It's not something supernatural that's happening because you got oil put on you, but it is something of a reminder of the presence of God. It is something of a physical dynamic that you can carry with you, because when I've been anointed with oil, or I've anointed other people with oil, it sticks to me. You know what I mean? That mark of oil on the forehead, it reminds me, it carries with me. I can almost feel it burn into me. It doesn't really do that. But there's something tangible that helps me understand the love of God, and that God's presence is with me. It's God's will. God's will for you to live separate, holy lives. To avoid, abstain, keep away from sexual immorality. Too many of us have been impacted by it, and we don't know what to do with it. Jesus says, bring it to me. Jesus says, bring it to me, and we'll start the process. So with that, worship team, Father, we ask, God, that you give us courage right now.